My name is Bradley Thornfield, and until 3 months ago I thought I knew exactly who I was. I was 35 years old, running a furniture restoration shop in Denver, the kind of place where the smell of wood stain and linseed oil had seeped so deep into the walls that it greeted you before you even opened the door. I thought I knew my story. The disappointing eldest son of Harrison Thornfield, a real estate mogul worth $180 million who built his empire from nothing and expected his children to be titans of industry. Instead, he got me, a man who chose sawdust under his fingernails over stock portfolios, who found more joy in bringing a broken Victorian armchair back to life than in any boardroom deal. But everything I thought I knew shattered the night Harrison slapped me across the face at his 70th birthday party in front of 200 guests. The crack of his palm against my cheek echoed through his Aspen Estates grand ballroom like a judge's gavel delivering a life sentence. "You're a disgrace to the family name," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of that massive room with its vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers. "I'm removing you from the will. Every penny of the $180 million goes to Preston and Cordelia. You get nothing." The phones came out immediately. My cousin Dennis was live-streaming before Harrison's hand even left my face. My other relatives, business associates, even the catering staff, they all had their cameras trained on me like I was some exotic animal in a zoo, experiencing a breakdown for their entertainment. The videos were online within minutes. "Billionaire disinherits son at birthday party" became the top trending topic that night. My humiliation was packaged, shared, and consumed by millions of strangers who would never know what led to that moment. Harrison Thornfield stands 6'2", with silver hair that he keeps perfectly styled even at 70. That night, he wore a custom Italian suit that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. He has these cold gray eyes that can calculate the value of anything in seconds, except, apparently, his oldest son. He built his real estate empire by being ruthless, by seeing opportunities where others saw obstacles, and by never, ever showing weakness. To him, I wasn't just weak. I was proof that even Harrison Thornfield could fail at something. Veronica Thornfield, the woman I called mother for 35 years, stood beside him in a black evening gown that made her look like royalty. At 68, she maintained herself with the dedication of someone who understood that appearance was currency in their social circle. Her blonde hair, professionally colored every 3 weeks, was swept into an elegant chignon. She had this way of smiling that never quite reached her eyes, especially when she looked at me. That night, as Harrison's hand connected with my face, I saw something flicker across her expression. Was it guilt, fear, or just disappointment that her husband was making a scene? The truth about that night, about everything that led to it and everything that came after, starts with understanding that families keep secrets. Some secrets are small, like the affair Harrison had 15 years ago that Veronica pretended not to know about. Some are medium-sized, like my brother Preston's gambling problem that mysteriously disappeared after a large sum vanished from one of Harrison's development funds. But some secrets are so massive, so fundamental, that they reshape reality itself. My secret, the one I didn't even know existed, was that Bradley Thornfield was never real. I was Jacob Carlisle, stolen from a park in Portland when I was 6 months old, raised by people who knew they were living a lie every single day for 35 years. Every birthday cake, every Christmas morning, every family photo was built on the foundation of a kidnapping that destroyed my biological parents' lives while creating the fiction of mine. The morning after Harrison's party, 3 lawyers knocked on my apartment door. Judith Blackstone, Arthur Reeves, and Calvin Park didn't look like angels of revelation, but that's exactly what they were. "We represent your biological father," Judith said, her voice gentle but certain. "Magnus Carlisle has been searching for his kidnapped son for 35 years. Calvin opened a briefcase and pulled out a file that contained my real life, the one that was stolen from me before I could even form memories. When I saw the photograph of my biological parents holding me as a baby, when I recognized the silver bracelet with the train engine that still circled my wrist, when I understood that everything I believed about myself was built on someone else's crime, I fell to my knees in my small apartment above the workshop, surrounded by the only honest things in my life. The furniture I'd restored with my own hands, even if I'd never known whose hands they really were. I'd always been the black sheep of the Thornfield family, though I never understood why it hurt Harrison so much that I chose differently than he expected. While my younger brother Preston managed hedge funds on Wall Street, turning millions into more millions with a few keyboard clicks, I spent my days bent over a workbench, coaxing life back into wood that others had given up for dead. My sister Cordelia ran her own law firm by 30, with 40 employees and clients that included half of Colorado's political elite. She had a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Denver, and I had a workshop that used to be a tire shop, where the afternoon light filtered through dust motes like golden snow. The workshop was my sanctuary. Every morning, I'd arrive at 6, before the rest of the world demanded anything from me, and I'd stand among the pieces waiting for restoration. Victorian chairs with broken spindles, Art Deco tables with water damage, grandmother clocks that hadn't ticked in decades. Each piece had a story, a history of being loved before it was broken. My clients trusted me with their heirlooms, their memories, and I took that responsibility seriously. Mrs. Dolores Ashworth was my favorite client, though she'd become much more than that over the years. At 78, she had this regal bearing that made you stand straighter in her presence. She'd bring me pieces from her estate sales, always wrapped carefully in old quilts, always with a story attached. This belonged to a railroad executive's widow, she'd say, running her weathered hands over a damaged escritoire. She wrote love letters at this desk for 50 years. Can you imagine? All that love soaked into the wood grain. She had this way of looking at me sometimes, studying my face like she was reading a book in a language she only half remembered. "You have gentle hands, Bradley," she told me once, while I was showing her the progress on a Japanese tea table. That's a gift from somewhere deep inside. Some things can't be taught or bought, they just are. My relationship with Harrison had been strained since I was 18, and announced I wasn't going to study business at Harvard like he'd planned. Instead, I went to the Rhode Island School of Design, studying furniture design and restoration. Harrison paid for it, but he made sure I knew it was under protest. "You're wasting your potential," he'd say during every holiday dinner, every birthday gathering, every time my work came up in conversation. "Any idiot with sandpaper can refinish furniture." My mother Veronica played the peacekeeper, though her peacekeeping always seemed to involve trying to change my mind rather than changing Harrison's expectations. "Bradley, darling," she'd say in that voice that sounded like honey but stung like whiskey, "you could do your little furniture hobby on weekends. Lots of successful executives have artistic hobbies. Look at your father's friend Mr. Cromwell. He paints watercolors, but he still runs a billion-dollar investment firm." The monthly dinners at the country club were exercises in endurance. Harrison would hold court at our regular table, the one with the view of the 18th hole, and he'd introduce me to his business associates with barely concealed disappointment. "This is my eldest, Bradley. He's in the furniture business." The pause before furniture always hung in the air like a bad smell. Then he'd quickly pivot to Preston's latest triumph or Cordelia's newest high-profile case, his voice brightening like someone had finally turned the lights on. 5 years ago, Harrison offered me a position in his company as Vice President of Development. It came with a 7-figure salary, a company car, stock options, and the clear understanding that I'd be groomed to take over part of his empire. I turned it down on a Tuesday afternoon in his office, watching his face cycle through disbelief, rage, and finally a cold dismissal that never quite thawed after that day. "You're choosing poverty," he said, his voice flat and matter-of-fact. You're choosing to be nobody when you could be somebody." "I'm choosing to be myself," I replied, though even then, I didn't know how ironic those words would become. Uncle Theodore, Harrison's younger brother, was the only one who understood. He was a professor of philosophy at the University of Colorado, which Harrison considered another waste of the Thornfield genes. "Brad, you know what your father's problem is?" Theodore told me once after a particularly tense family dinner. "He can't conceive of success that doesn't come with a dollar sign attached. But you and I know better. We know that meaning isn't measured in square footage or stock portfolios." The morning of Harrison's 70th birthday party, I felt optimistic for the first time in years. I'd spent 3 months restoring a piece that mattered, something I thought might finally bridge the gap between us. It was a 1920s mahogany desk that had belonged to Harrison's father, my grandfather, though now I know that was just another lie in the tapestry of fiction that was my life as Bradley Thornfield. The party was held at Harrison's estate in Aspen, a massive mountain lodge that looked like something architectural magazines feature when they want to show how the ultra-wealthy interpret rustic charm. 20,000 square feet of imported stone and reclaimed timber, with windows that turned the Colorado mountains into living paintings. 200 guests had gathered to celebrate Harrison Thornfield's 70th birthday, and the parking area looked like a luxury car showroom. I parked my beaten Ford pickup between a Bentley and a Tesla, the mahogany desk wrapped in moving blankets in the truck bed. I arrived early specifically to set up the desk in his study as a surprise. The house staff knew me well enough to let me in through the service entrance without questions. They'd watched this family's dysfunction long enough to stay out of our drama. I spent an hour positioning the desk exactly where his old one sat, adjusting the leather inlay to catch the light from the window just right. This desk had taken me 3 months to restore, finding period-appropriate hardware, matching the original wood stain through dozens of attempts, replacing the leather with identical grain patterns. It was possibly my best work. The party started at 6, and by 7, Harrison was in his element. He stood in the center of the main hall, a glass of 30-year-old scotch in his hand, surrounded by admirers and business associates who laughed at his jokes like their contracts depended on it. Preston worked the room's east side, discussing cryptocurrency and market volatility with a group of investors. Cordelia held court near the fireplace, charming a state senator who was clearly interested in more than her legal opinions. I kept to the edges of the party, finding comfort in conversation, with Uncle Theodore, who looked as out of place as I felt despite his expensive suit. "You clean up nice, Brad," he said, clinking his beer against mine. We were the only two drinking beer at a party where the champagne cost more per bottle than most people's car payments. "The shop's been good," I told him, genuinely happy to share something positive. "I just landed a contract with the Denver History Museum. They want me to restore an entire collection of Gold Rush-era furniture." Theodore's eyes lit up. "That's fantastic. Real cultural preservation work. You should be proud." That's when Harrison's voice boomed across the room, cutting through every conversation like a blade. "Bradley, come here, son. Tell everyone about your little hobby shop." The condescension in his voice was thick enough to choke on. Every head in the room turned toward me. I saw phones already coming out, the socialites sensing drama the way sharks smell blood in the water. My cousin Dennis had his phone up and recording before I'd even taken my first step toward Harrison. Nadine positioned herself for a better angle. Even Mr. Cromwell, Harrison's closest business partner, had his phone discreetly raised. The crowd parted as I walked through, their faces showing that mixture of sympathy and anticipation that people wear when they're about to witness a car crash. Harrison stood in the center of his admirers like a king holding court, his gray eyes locked on mine with an expression I'd seen before. It was the same look he wore when he was about to destroy a business competitor. "Actually, Dad, I wanted to show you something," I started, trying to keep my voice steady and redirect the conversation. "I have a gift in your study that I think you'll appreciate." "A gift?" Harrison laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. The Scotch had loosened his usual control, but his cruelty was laser-focused. What could you possibly give me that I couldn't buy myself 10 times over? Another dusty chair? A refinished table? Perhaps a quaint little bookshelf? The crowd chuckled uncomfortably. Some looked away, but most kept watching. This was better entertainment than anything Harrison's money had provided so far. "You know what your real gift to me could be?" Harrison continued, his voice rising with each word. Finally acting like a Thornfield. Finally showing some ambition instead of playing with sawdust like a child. "Do you have any idea what people say about you? About me? Harrison Thornfield's son, the carpenter. Like you're some kind of biblical character instead of a businessman. I'm not playing, Dad. I run a legitimate business that preserves historical artifacts. I have employees, contracts, a reputation built on quality work. A business." Harrison's face turned an alarming shade of red. "You call that a business? You make less in a year than Preston makes in a month. You make less than Cordelia bills in a week. You're 35 years old, unmarried, no children, living in a converted loft above a workshop that smells like turpentine and failure. Harrison, please." My mother, Veronica, tried to intervene, reaching for his arm, but he yanked it away from her touch. "No, Veronica. I'm done pretending. Done hoping he'll change, done lying to our friends that Bradley is just finding himself." He turned back to me, his eyes cold as winter granite. "You want to know what I really think?" The slap came without warning. I drove through the Colorado night with my face still burning from Harrison's slap, the mountain roads blurring through tears I refused to let fall. The mahogany desk remained in my truck bed, wrapped in blankets like a corpse, a monument to my foolish belief that craftsmanship could ever matter to a man who measured everything in dollar signs and market dominance. The 3-hour drive from Aspen to Denver felt like crossing between worlds, from Harrison's kingdom of crystal and marble to my realm of sawdust and honest work. My phone vibrated constantly on the passenger seat, the screen lighting up with notifications I didn't want to see. The videos were already viral. Dennis had titled his live stream, "Family Fortune Fumble, Billionaire Breaks Bad at Birthday." By the time I reached Denver, there were 17 missed calls from reporters, 43 text messages from people I hadn't spoken to since college, and one voicemail from Preston saying simply, "Jesus, Brad, I'm sorry. He went too far." My apartment above the workshop had never felt more like a sanctuary. I climbed the exterior stairs slowly, each step an effort against the weight of 35 years of inadequacy that Harrison had just validated in front of everyone who mattered in his world. The familiar smell of wood stain and linseed oil greeted me as I opened the door, and for a moment I just stood there breathing it in, letting it remind me who I was when I wasn't trying to be Harrison Thornfield's son. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the phones pointed at me, heard the nervous laughter of the crowd, felt the sting of Harrison's palm against my cheek. At 2 a.m, I gave up and went down to the workshop. A half-finished rocking chair sat on my workbench, its curves waiting for the final sanding that would bring out the cherry wood's natural flame pattern. I ran my hands over it, feeling the grain, the spots that still needed attention, the potential waiting to be revealed. That's when the anger finally came. Not the hot, explosive rage that Harrison wielded like a weapon, but something colder, more focused. I was done. Done trying to earn approval from a man who saw my life's work as an embarrassment. Done defending choices that needed no defense. Done being a Thornfield if being a Thornfield meant crushing everything gentle and creative and meaningful in the pursuit of wealth. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and started writing. If Harrison wanted to cut me from his will, fine. I'd build something without his money, without his name, without his shadow looming over every decision. I wrote out a business plan that I'd been too afraid to pursue. Expansion into Santa Fe and Portland, partnerships with museums across the Southwest, an apprenticeship program for young craftspeople who deserved better than to be told their gifts were worthless. The loan applications would be brutal without the Thornfield name as collateral, but I had enough saved for a start. My credit was good. My reputation in the restoration community was solid. I could move somewhere where Harrison Thornfield was just another rich man, not the sun around which everyone orbited. At 6 in the morning, Mrs. Ashworth called. I almost didn't answer, but something in the persistence of her ring made me pick up. "Bradley, dear." Her voice was warm but urgent. I saw what happened. That horrible man. "Are you all right?" "I will be," I told her, and for the first time since the slap I actually believed it. "I'm thinking about leaving Denver, starting fresh somewhere else." "Before you do anything drastic," she said, and there was something strange in her voice, a weight that hadn't been there in our previous conversations. "There's something I should tell you. I've known your family for 50 years, Bradley. I knew Harrison when he was building his first apartment complex, and I knew Veronica when she was desperate for a child after her third miscarriage." My hand tightened on the phone. "Mrs. Ashworth, what are you talking about?" "There are things about your father, about you, about how you came to be their son that never quite added up. The timeline, Bradley. You appeared in their lives when you were supposedly 2 years old, but there are no pictures of you before that. No birth announcement, no hospital records at Denver General where Veronica claims you were born. That doesn't mean anything. Maybe they lost the photos. Maybe the records were misplaced. Maybe," she said softly, "or maybe the reason you could never be the son Harrison wanted is because you were never meant to be his son at all. Promise me you'll be home this morning around 9. Trust me, Bradley, I've been waiting 35 years to right a terrible wrong, and I think the universe finally gave me the opening I needed." The knock came at exactly 9 in the morning. 3 measured raps that echoed through my apartment with an authority that made my coffee cup pause halfway to my lips. I set it down carefully, walked to the door, and opened it to find 3 people who looked like they'd stepped out of a corporate law firm's recruitment poster. The woman in front stood tall and composed, her silver-streaked black hair pulled into a perfect chignon, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my truck. The 2 men flanking her looked equally professional, one older with kind brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, one younger holding a leather briefcase like it contained nuclear codes. "Bradley Thornfield?" the woman asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Yes?" "My name is Judith Blackstone. I'm a senior partner at Blackstone Reeves and Associates. These are my colleagues, Mr. Arthur Reeves and Mr. Calvin Park. We represent your biological father. May we come in?" The words hit me like ice water. My biological father? There's some mistake. Harrison Thornfield is my father. I have a birth certificate, Social Security records, a whole life that says Harrison Thornfield is my father. "Mr. Thornfield," Judith said, her voice gentle but firm, "we represent Magnus Carlyle. He's been searching for his kidnapped son for 35 years. His son was taken from Laurelhurst Park in Portland when he was 6 months old. That son's name was Jacob Carlyle. 3 months ago, a DNA match from a genealogy website confirmed what Magnus has suspected for years. You are Jacob Carlyle." My legs felt disconnected from my body. "This is insane. You're telling me I was kidnapped? That Harrison and Veronica kidnapped me?" "May we come in?" Judith repeated. "This conversation shouldn't happen in a hallway, and what we have to show you will require you to sit down." I stepped aside numbly, watching as they entered with practiced efficiency. Calvin immediately set his briefcase on my coffee table and began extracting documents. Arthur moved to the window, positioning himself like this was some kind of security operation. Judith sat across from me, her posture perfect, her eyes sympathetic but determined. "Your biological father, Magnus Carlyle, wanted us to approach you carefully," she began, "especially after what happened last night at Harrison Thornfield's party. Yes, we saw the videos. Magnus has been monitoring your life for 3 months, ever since the DNA match came through. He needed to be absolutely certain before destroying the life you've known. Calvin opened a manila folder and pulled out a photograph, sliding it across the coffee table toward me. This was taken 6 weeks before you were kidnapped. The photo showed a young couple in a park, the man tall with dark hair and green eyes that looked exactly like mine, holding a baby while a woman with my nose and my jawline laughed at something outside the frame. But it was the baby that made my breath catch. Around his tiny wrist was a silver bracelet with an engraved train engine. I looked down at my own wrist, where the same bracelet had sat for 35 years. Harrison had told me it was a Thornfield family heirloom, passed down from his father. I'd worn it every day, this piece of my heritage, this connection to my grandfather. "That's not possible," I whispered, but even as I said it, pieces were sliding into place. Why there were no photos of me before age 2. Why I looked nothing like Harrison's sharp features or Veronica's delicate bone structure. Why extended family members sometimes did double takes when they saw me. Why Uncle Theodore always looked at me with that strange expression, like he was seeing a ghost. Calvin pulled out another document. This is the police report from June 15, 1990. Jacob Carlisle, 6 months old, was taken from his stroller while his nanny was distracted by a woman asking for directions. The nanny, Maria Santos, gave a description of the woman that, when age progressed, bears a remarkable resemblance to Veronica Thornfield. "The nanny died 15 years ago," Arthur added quietly, "but she left a confession with her priest. She was paid $50,000 to look away for 5 minutes. She thought the baby was going to a loving family who couldn't have children. She didn't know it was a kidnapping until she saw the news coverage, and by then she was too terrified to come forward." Judith leaned forward. "Magnus Carlisle isn't just any man searching for his lost son, Mr. Thornfield. He's the founder and CEO of Carlisle Industries, aerospace, renewable energy, technology patents. His company builds the navigation systems for half the commercial airlines in the world." Calvin pulled out one final document. "This is Magnus's will, updated every year for 35 years, always maintaining a place for Jacob. You're the sole heir to an estate worth approximately $2.8 billion. The room spun. I felt my knees hit the floor, the weight of 35 years of lies crushing down on me. That conversation happened 3 months ago, and every day since has been like learning to walk again in a world where the ground keeps shifting. The DNA tests confirmed everything with 99% certainty. I was Jacob Magnus Carlisle, stolen from Laurelhurst Park on a sunny Tuesday morning, while my nanny Maria Santos was paid to look the other way. The woman who distracted her, asking for directions to a hospital that didn't exist, was Veronica Thornfield wearing a wig and sunglasses, desperate for a child after 4 miscarriages had broken something fundamental inside her. Harrison and Veronica were arrested 2 weeks after the lawyers knocked on my door. The FBI had been building a case quietly once a Magnus provided them with the DNA evidence. The arrest happened at their country club, right in the middle of their Tuesday golf game, with the same audience of elite socialites who'd watched Harrison slap me at his birthday party. This time, Dennis didn't get to live stream it, but the news crews captured every second of Harrison being led away in handcuffs, his face purple with rage, shouting about his lawyers and his connections and how this was all a mistake. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged adoption papers claiming I was adopted from a defunct agency in Mexico. Bribes to courthouse clerks to backdate records. A paper trail of deception that Harrison had maintained with the same meticulous attention he gave his real estate deals. Veronica broke down during her first interrogation, confessing everything, how she'd found the adoption ring through a desperate late-night internet search, how she'd convinced Harrison that this was their only chance, how she'd lived every day for 35 years, terrified that someone would notice I had Magnus's eyes, Eleanor's nose, neither of their blood. Preston and Cordelia discovered their entire inheritance was being seized as proceeds of crime. The irony was perfect and terrible. Harrison had disinherited me from money that was never his to give, from a fortune built partially on the foundation of raising a stolen child. Preston called me once, drunk and crying, saying he was sorry for every time he'd rubbed his success in my face. Cordelia sent a letter through her lawyer, formal and cold, saying she hoped I found peace with my real family. But the strangest part wasn't gaining billions or losing the only parents I'd ever known. It was meeting Magnus for the first time. After the lawyers showed me the evidence, I walked downstairs to find him standing beside a black sedan. This tall, silver-haired man who looked like me aged 35 years into the future. He didn't try to hug me. He just stood there with tears streaming down his face and said, "You still wear the bracelet. I have the matching one. I've worn it every day since you disappeared." We went for coffee at a small shop near my workshop, and he told me about Eleanor, my biological mother who died 5 years ago from cancer, never giving up hope that I was alive somewhere. "She decorated your nursery with trains," he said, his voice breaking. "You loved them. You'd make this little whistle sound when you saw one. She kept that nursery exactly the same for 30 years, until the cancer got too bad and we had to sell that house to pay for treatments. Magnus, it turned out, had built his empire the same way I restored furniture. Piece by piece, with patience and precision, and an obsession with quality. You can't change what you are, son, he told me over our third cup of coffee. Even 35 years of lies couldn't erase your true nature. The way you restore things, that's exactly how I built Carlisle Industries, taking broken companies and making them whole again. Mrs. Ashworth visited last week and finally told me the truth. She'd been Eleanor's best friend in college, my godmother who'd been at the hospital when I was born. She'd moved to Denver 20 years ago for her husband's work, and when she met me at an estate sale, she nearly fainted. You looked so much like Eleanor it took my breath away. I've been investigating ever since, pushing Magnus to try the DNA databases, waiting for the right moment to bring the truth to light. I kept my workshop, but moved it to Portland, to a bigger space near Magnus's headquarters. He offered to buy me an entire building, but I refused. "This is mine," I told him. "Built with my own hands even if they're Carlisle hands, not Thornfield ones." The rocking chair I was building that night, the one I touched, while planning my escape from Harrison's shadow, now sits in Magnus's living room. He rocks in it every evening, looking at photos of Eleanor, telling me stories about the 6 months they had with me before I was taken. Next to it sits the mahogany desk I'd restored for Harrison. Magnus bought it at the estate auction for 10 times its value, just to keep it in the family, he said, even if it came from the wrong one. If this story touched you, if it made you think about the mysteries that might hide in your own family history, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below about your own family surprises or moments when you discovered who you really were. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories that remind us that sometimes the life we're meant to live is just waiting for us to discover it.